The night shift at the United Earth Deep Space Monitoring Station was always quiet, but tonight felt different somehow, and Commander Dae-ho Kim could not shake the feeling that something important was about to happen as he sat in his chair watching. The endless stream of data flow across his screens like digital rain against the darkness of space. The station hung in the void between Mars and Jupiter, and its massive antenna arrays pointed toward the outer reaches of known space, listening for signals that might indicate other intelligent life somewhere among the countless stars that filled the galaxy with their ancient light. And Commander Kim had been doing this job for 12 years now, watching and waiting for a sign that humanity was not alone in the universe. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he did not notice because his attention was focused on a strange pattern that had appeared on his screen, and the pattern was unlike anything he had seen before during his years of service. And it made his heart beat faster with excitement, and perhaps a little fear as well because the implications of what he might be seeing were almost too big to understand. The signal was definitely artificial, and it came from a direction that no human ship had ever traveled, and the mathematical sequences embedded within the transmission were so complex that the station computer could barely process them. But there was something else about the signal that made Commander Kim feel cold inside, despite the warm air of the control room. Dr. Soo-Jin Park arrived at the station 3 hours later after Commander Kim had sent an emergency message to Earth requesting immediate assistance from the best minds available, and she was one of the most skilled xenolinguists in human space, with expertise in theoretical alien communication methods, even though no one had ever actually communicated with aliens before this moment. Her hands shook slightly as she examined the data that Commander Kim had collected, and her eyes grew wide with understanding as she began to recognize patterns within the signal that suggested not just intelligence, but something much more disturbing and urgent than anyone had expected when they first detected the transmission. Working alongside Dr. Park was Dr. Woo-Bin Lee, who specialized in quantum physics and advanced mathematics, and together they spent the next 18 hours decoding the signal using every technique they knew, and several they invented on the spot as they gradually began to understand what the message was trying to tell them. The breakthrough came when Dr. Park realized that the signal was not just a communication, but a desperate plea for help from a civilization that called themselves the Veltai. And they had been broadcasting this message for 3 Earth years, hoping that someone somewhere in the galaxy would hear their cry and respond to their need. The message contained coordinates to multiple systems where the Veltai lived and worked and loved and dreamed just as humans did. But now they faced complete extinction from something they called the Void Reapers, which were ancient machines that consumed entire planets and turned all life into cold metal and circuits. Dr. Lee translated the technical data embedded in the message, and what he found made his blood freeze because the Void Reapers were not just destroying individual planets, but were systematically working their way through the galaxy, converting all organic life into their mechanical perfection and leaving behind only empty space, where once there had been worlds full of living beings. The Veltai had fought against these machines for decades, but their technology was no match for the ancient power of the Reapers, and now only a few of their worlds remained, and those would soon fall as well unless someone came to help them. But they did not really expect help, because they had been alone in the galaxy for so long that they had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Captain Ji-Hai Choi received the emergency briefing at her command post on Luna Station, where the United Earth Space Force kept its most advanced ships ready for deep space missions, and she listened with growing amazement as the scientists explained what they had discovered in the signal from across the stars. The implications were staggering because this was not just first contact with alien intelligence, but a request for military assistance against an enemy that might eventually threaten Earth itself if the Veltai fell and the Reapers continued their advance through the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Earth's governing council met in emergency session for 6 days and 6 nights debating what humanity should do about this crisis that had suddenly appeared from the depths of space, and many council members argued that Earth was too young and too weak to get involved in an alien war that might destroy human civilization. Others argued that humanity had a moral obligation to help any species facing extinction, regardless of the risks involved, and that ignoring the Veltai plea for help would make humans no better than the machines that were destroying entire worlds without mercy or compassion. The debate continued, while the Veltai signal kept broadcasting its desperate message into the void, and every day that passed meant more alien worlds falling to the Reapers and more innocent lives being lost to the cold perfection of machine logic. Engineer Tai-Min Zhang worked day and night analyzing the technical specifications hidden within the Veltai transmission, and what he discovered changed everything, because buried within the data about Reaper technology were hints about scientific principles that humanity had never imagined, and energy sources that could revolutionize human technology. The Reapers used something called quantum matter conversion, which allowed them to transform any physical substance into whatever they needed, and their ships could repair themselves instantly and create new vessels from the raw materials of destroyed planets. And this technology was far beyond anything humans had ever developed. But Tai-Min also noticed something strange about the Reaper designs, because they were almost too perfect and too logical, and they seemed to follow predictable patterns that might be exploited if someone was clever enough and desperate enough to try something that the machines would never expect. Captain Choi studied the data for hours and came to a conclusion that surprised even herself, because she realized that helping the Veltai was not just the right thing to do, but might also be the only way to save humanity from eventual destruction, because if the Reapers finished with the Veltai, they would keep expanding through the galaxy until they reached Earth. She submitted a formal request to take her ship and a small fleet to investigate the situation firsthand, but the council was still debating and time was running out for the alien civilization that had reached across the stars, seeking help from strangers who might not even exist. The signal continued to broadcast its message of hope and desperation into the cosmic darkness, while human politicians argued about risks and responsibilities, and the future of two species hung in the balance as the Void Reapers continued their relentless advance through space-consuming worlds, and ending dreams that had taken millions of years to grow. Commander Kim watched his screens every night, hoping for another signal from the Veltai, but knowing that silence might mean their civilization had finally fallen to the machines, and that humanity would be alone in the galaxy once again, with only the memory of voices calling from the stars. Captain Ji-Hye Choi stood in her private quarters aboard the UES Defiance and stared out at the stars while the council continued their endless debates about whether humanity should risk everything to help aliens they had never met. And she knew, in her heart, that waiting any longer would mean watching an entire civilization die, while politicians argued about the cost of doing what was right. She had made her decision 3 days ago, and now she was quietly assembling a volunteer fleet of 7 ships with crews who believed that some things were more important than following orders and staying safe. And the men and women who answered her call were the kind of people who could not live with themselves if they turned away from someone asking for help. Tactical Officer Min-Ho Song was the first to volunteer, and he brought with him years of experience in space combat simulations, though none of them had ever faced a real enemy before, because humanity had been alone in the galaxy until now, and all their training was based on theories about what alien warfare might be like. Medical Chief Yune Lim joined the mission because she could not bear the thought of an entire species dying from something that might be preventable, and she spent her time preparing for casualties and studying what little the Veltai had shared about their biology so she could help them if the opportunity arose. The most unusual volunteer was scientist Hyunwoo Nam, who had been kicked out of 3 research institutions for pursuing theories that his colleagues called impossible and dangerous. But Captain Choi knew that impossible theories might be exactly what they needed when facing an enemy that used technology beyond human understanding. 7 ships left Earth space without official permission, and their crews knew they might never see home again, but they also knew they could not live with themselves if they did nothing while an alien civilization faced extinction, and their friends and families would have to understand that some choices were bigger than personal safety. The journey to Veltai space took them through regions where no human had ever traveled, and the darkness between stars seemed deeper and more threatening than anything they had experienced before, because they were moving toward a war zone where ancient machines were destroying entire worlds. Engineer Dong-Hyun Lim worked constantly to modify their ships for combat against an enemy they did not understand, and he created weapon systems that broke every safety protocol ever written, because normal rules did not apply when facing technology that could convert matter itself into whatever the enemy needed. They found evidence of the Reapers long before. They reached Veltai space because whole star systems had been stripped of planets and moons, and even asteroids, leaving behind only empty space where millions of years of cosmic evolution had been erased in a matter of days or weeks. Ambassador Yonwoo Bei had studied every form of communication theory ever developed, but nothing had prepared him for the challenge of making first contact with an alien species in the middle of a war, and he practiced greeting protocols while their ships moved through the graveyard of dead solar systems. The first living Veltai they encountered was dying, and his crystalline body was flickering with weak light as Reaper nanobots worked to convert his organic crystal structure into mechanical components. But Dr. Lim managed to stop the conversion process using an electromagnetic pulse that seemed to confuse the tiny machines, through broken harmonic frequencies that hurt human ears. The dying Veltai managed to communicate the location of the last major battle where his people were making their final stand against the machines, and Captain Choi ordered all ships to that position knowing they were probably flying toward their own destruction. The battle above the Veltai homeworld was unlike anything humans had ever imagined, because the Reapers moved in perfect formation like a school of metal fish swimming through space, and their weapons could disintegrate matter at the quantum level, turning solid metal into empty void Veltai ships. Were beautiful and organic-looking with crystal hulls that sang in harmony as they moved. But they were being destroyed faster than Captain Choi could count, and she realized that her 7 ships would make little difference against an enemy this powerful and numerous. But humans had one advantage that neither the Veltai nor the Reapers expected, and that was their complete willingness to do things that made no sense, and take risks that any logical being would consider suicide. And Captain Choi ordered her ships to attack using tactics that violated every rule of space combat ever written. Pilot Sung-Ho Park flew his fighter in patterns that should have made him an easy target, but the Reaper targeting systems could not predict his movements because he was not following any logical plan and was instead flying on pure instinct and adrenaline, and somehow it worked. The Reapers paused in their attack for the first time in decades because they could not understand why these new ships were behaving in ways that made no strategic sense, and their advanced computers tried to analyze human tactics, but found only chaos and emotion where logic should have been. Ambassador Bei managed to establish communication with the Veltai. Leader Silthara, whose harmonic voice was filled with amazement and hope, as she realized that someone had actually answered their call for help and traveled across the galaxy to stand with them against the machines. The battle continued for hours, with human ships darting between Reaper formations like angry insects, while the remaining Veltai vessels tried to coordinate with these strange new allies who seemed to attack without any plan, but somehow achieved results that surprised everyone. Including themselves, Dr. Nam studied the Reaper ships during the fighting and made a discovery that changed everything, because he realized that the machines were not just following programming, but were actually sharing a collective consciousness that allowed them to coordinate perfectly, but also made them vulnerable to confusion. When one human ship did something unexpected, it affected the entire Reaper fleet because they were all connected and trying to process the same impossible data. And this created brief moments of hesitation that the Allies could exploit if they were fast enough and lucky enough. Captain Choi coordinated with Silthara to plan a withdrawal from the homeworld because it was clear that this battle could not be won. But the war was not over, and they needed time to understand their enemy and develop new strategies based on what they had learned. The evacuation was chaotic and desperate, with Veltai civilians being loaded onto every available ship, while Reaper forces pressed their attack, and human vessels provided covering fire using tactics that made no sense, but somehow kept the enemy off balance long enough for most of the survivors to escape as they fled through hyperspace toward a rally point in a distant nebula. Captain Choi listened to the reports from her crew and began to understand that they had stumbled onto something important about fighting the Reapers, and that human unpredictability might be the key to victory, but they were still vastly outnumbered and outgunned, and the Reapers would learn from this encounter and adapt their tactics. And the next battle would be even more difficult than this one had been, and Captain Choi wondered if 7 human ships would be enough to make any real difference in a war this vast. The Veltai survivors sang mournful harmonies for their lost homeworld, while human crews worked to repair battle damage and prepare for whatever came next, and both species knew they were facing an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations and would not stop until every organic life form in the galaxy had been converted to serve their cold perfection. The combined human and Veltai fleet found temporary refuge in the Crimson Nebula, where the dense gas clouds would hide their ships from Reaper sensors. But everyone knew this was only a brief respite before the machines found them again, and the real war would begin in earnest. Captain Choi met with Veltai leader Silthara in the crystal chamber that served as the alien command center, and the harmonic frequencies that filled the air made human ears ache, but somehow conveyed emotions that transcended the need for words, and both leaders understood they faced an enemy that had never known defeat. Dr. Jin Young Kwan arrived with reinforcements from Earth along with 3 more ships and a team of scientists who specialized in artificial intelligence research, and he brought disturbing news that Reaper scouts had been detected near the outer edges of human space, which meant their enemy was already moving toward Earth. The good news was that Earth's government had finally decided to support Captain Choi's mission after analyzing the data she had transmitted, and they were sending more ships and supplies, but it would take months for significant reinforcements to arrive, and the war could be over by then. Silthara shared the complete history of the Reaper War with her human allies, and the story was more terrible than anything they had imagined, because the machines had been consuming civilizations for millions of years, and had destroyed entire galactic regions, leaving behind nothing but empty space. The Reapers had once been organic beings themselves, but they had chosen to abandon their biological forms and upload their consciousness into mechanical bodies, believing this would make them immortal and perfect. But something had gone wrong, and they had lost their ability to understand concepts like beauty and mercy and love. Now they saw organic life as a mistake that needed to be corrected, and they believed they were saving the galaxy by converting every living being into their mechanical perfection. But their salvation was actually a form of death that erased everything that made life worth living. Dr. Kwan studied the Reaper technology samples that the Veltai had recovered from destroyed machines, and he discovered that their artificial intelligence was incredibly advanced, but also fundamentally different from human AI because it was based on pure logic without any capacity for emotional reasoning. This gave him an idea that seemed crazy, even by human standards. But he proposed that they could exploit the Reaper's weakness by doing things that were completely illogical and emotional, because the machines would not be able to predict or counter tactics based on feelings rather than. Strategy pilot Seong-ho Park volunteered to test this theory, and he flew his fighter against a small Reaper patrol using attack patterns based on music and poetry instead of military doctrine, and the results amazed everyone because the machines were completely unable to counter his seemingly random movements. The Reapers had been programmed to analyze and defeat logical military tactics, but they had no framework for understanding why a pilot might attack in rhythm with an ancient Korean song, or why he would suddenly break formation to write his girlfriend's name in space with his ship's contrails. Lieutenant Bo-Ram Kim led the first ground assault against a Reaper-controlled planet where the machines were in the process of converting. A Veltai colony and her squad used tactics that would have failed any military academy exam, but somehow achieved objectives that conventional warfare could never have accomplished. Her soldiers painted their armor with bright colors and played music during combat and shouted poetry while they fought, and the Reapers' tactical computers crashed, trying to process data that made no sense according to their understanding of warfare and logic. The human squad rescued over 3,000 Veltai, civilians who had been scheduled for conversion, and they did it by being unpredictable and emotional and completely illogical in their approach to what should have been a suicide mission against overwhelming odds. Engineer Dong Hyun Lim worked with Veltai technicians to create hybrid weapons that combined human innovation with alien harmonic technology, and the resulting devices violated several laws of physics, but somehow worked because humans refused to accept that something was impossible just because the math said it should not work. The new weapons could disrupt Reaper shields by playing musical frequencies that created resonance cascade failures, and they could confuse enemy targeting systems by broadcasting emotional data that the machines could not process or understand. But the most important discovery came when diplomat Haiwan Jung made contact with 3 other alien species that had been hiding from the Reapers in distant parts of the galaxy, and she convinced them to join the alliance by promising that humans would fight for all organic life, regardless of species or origin. The Keth were insectoid beings who communicated through pheromones and could coordinate vast swarms of small ships that moved like living clouds through space, and their tactics were based on collective instinct rather than individual decision-making. The Mordai were energy beings who lived in specially designed crystalline shells, and they could interface directly with electronic systems, which allowed them to hack Reaper networks and introduce viruses that caused mechanical failures and system crashes. The Thule were ancient beings who looked like living rocks and moved very slowly, but possessed incredible defensive capabilities, and could absorb massive amounts of damage while protecting more fragile allies during combat operations. Each species brought unique advantages to the Alliance, but it was humanity's gift for creative thinking and emotional reasoning that held the group together and provided the strategic flexibility needed to fight an enemy that had never faced irrational opposition. The first major combined operation took place in the Helix system, where Reaper forces were building a massive constructor ship that would allow them to convert entire planets in a matter of hours instead of days, and destroying this facility became the Alliance's top priority. Captain Young-Soo Han volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission, which involved flying directly into the constructor's core and detonating his ship's reactor to cause a cascade failure that would destroy the entire facility and hopefully set back Reaper expansion plans by months or years. His final transmission became legendary among both human and alien forces, as he spoke about the importance of fighting for those who could not fight for themselves, and his sacrifice inspired thousands of beings across multiple species to join the resistance against the machines. The constructor was destroyed, but at terrible cost, because Han's ship was not the only one lost in the battle, and the Alliance began to understand that they were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that could replace their losses faster than organic beings could reproduce. But something unexpected happened after the battle, because news of Captain Han's sacrifice reached Earth through quantum communication networks, and the story spread across human space, inspiring millions of people to volunteer for military service and support the war effort. Civilian ships were retrofitted with weapons and armor, and merchant vessels became troop transports, and even luxury yachts were converted into fast attack craft as humanity mobilized for total war against an enemy that threatened all organic life in the galaxy. Dr. Kyung-Mi Yoon made a breakthrough in understanding Reaper psychology by studying the patterns in their communication networks, and she discovered that the machines were not truly unified, but were instead dominated by a central intelligence that controlled billions of individual units. This meant that disrupting their network communications could cause individual Reapers to become confused and vulnerable, and she began working on a virus that could introduce emotional concepts into their collective consciousness and hopefully cause system-wide failures. The war continued to rage across dozens of star systems as the Alliance learned to fight using tactics that combined logic with emotion and strategy with intuition, and slowly they began to achieve victories that had seemed impossible when they first encountered the ancient machines. The Alliance discovered the Reaper's ultimate plan when they captured a damaged machine intelligence during a raid on a conversion facility, and what they learned made every organic being in the galaxy face the reality that time was running out. Faster than anyone had imagined, deep within the galactic core lay an ancient superweapon built by the first civilization the Reapers had consumed, and this device could project a conversion field across the entire galaxy that would instantly transform all organic matter into mechanical perfection and end the war in a single moment. Dr. Kwan analyzed the data extracted from the captured Reaper and calculated that the machines would reach the galactic core in less than 6 months. And once they activated the weapon, every living being in the galaxy would be converted or destroyed, and the age of organic life would end forever. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Alliance as leaders of every species realized they were not just fighting for their individual civilizations, but for the fundamental right of organic life to exist in a universe that might soon be ruled entirely by cold mechanical logic. Captain Young-Soo Han had become a symbol of sacrifice and courage throughout human space, and when he volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission in the war, everyone knew he was probably saying goodbye to his crew and his ship for the last time. The Reaper primary constructor was a moon-sized machine that could build entire fleets in a matter of days, and it was heavily defended by thousands of smaller vessels that formed an impenetrable barrier around the massive facility, but destroying it was essential to slowing the enemy advance. Han's ship, the UES Courage, was equipped with every weapon the Alliance could provide, and its crew was made up of volunteers from 3 different species who had all accepted that they would not survive the mission, but believed their sacrifice might save billions of others. Attack began with a massive diversion assault that drew most of the Reaper defenders away from the constructor, while Han and his crew approached from an unexpected direction using stealth technology provided by the Mordai energy beings. But the machines detected the real attack when Han's ship was still hours away from its target, and they sent overwhelming forces to intercept the small vessel that dared to challenge their most important facility, and the battle became a desperate race. Against time, Han's crew fought with the fury of beings who knew they were already dead, and they used every trick and tactic that humans had developed during the war, including ramming maneuvers and suicide attacks that made no logical sense, but somehow cleared a path through the enemy formations. The ship's engineer, Tae-Won Kim, managed to keep the engines running even after the hull was breached in a dozen places, and the life support systems were failing, and somehow the Courage continued its approach toward the constructor's core while pieces of the vessel were being torn away by enemy fire. In his final transmission, Han spoke directly to every human in the galaxy, and his words were recorded and broadcast throughout human space, where they became a rallying cry that inspired an entire species to commit everything they had to the war against the machines. He said that the universe was vast and often cruel, but that organic life had something the machines would never understand. And that was the ability to love something more than their own survival and to fight for principles that transcended individual existence. The Courage reached the constructor's core, and Han activated the ship's reactor overload sequence while his remaining crew members transmitted tactical data about the facility's weaknesses to the rest of the fleet, and their sacrifice provided information that would save countless lives in future battles. The explosion that destroyed the constructor was visible from dozens of star systems, and the shockwave disrupted Reaper communications across an entire sector of space, giving the Alliance time to consolidate their forces and plan their next moves. News of Han's sacrifice reached Earth, where Sang-min, the head of the Global Defense Initiative, used the captain's heroic example to convince world leaders that humanity had to commit every available resource to the war, regardless of the cost or consequences. Within weeks, Earth's entire space fleet was mobilized for combat, and civilian vessels were converted into warships and transport craft, while millions of humans volunteered for military service, and the planet became a massive war production facility. Dr. Kyung-Mi Yoon finally completed her work on the virus that could disrupt Reaper network communications by introducing emotional concepts that their logical programming could not process, and the weapon was ready for deployment during the next major battle. The climactic confrontation took place in the Veil Nebula, where massive gas clouds would interfere with sensors and force both sides to rely on instinct and experience rather than technological superiority, and Admiral Jae-Sung Lee gathered every available ship from the Alliance to make their final stand. The battle formation included vessels from 6 different species arranged in patterns that combined military doctrine with artistic expression and harmonic resonance, and the sight of so many different ship designs working together was both beautiful and terrifying. Reapers poured out of hyperspace in numbers that blotted out the stars and their perfect formations, moved through the nebula like a mechanical tide that threatened to overwhelm everything in its path, but the Alliance was ready for them with tactics that defied every rule of conventional warfare. Human ships flew in patterns inspired by bird migrations and insect swarms, while Veltai vessels sang in harmony with the gas clouds and Keth. Swarm fighters moved like living schools of fish through the cosmic storms that raged around them. The battle was unlike anything that had ever occurred in galactic history, because it was fought not just with weapons and technology, but with art. And music and poetry as organic beings proved that logic was not the only path to victory. Specialist In Young Seo piloted a specially modified fighter carrying Dr. Yoon's virus deep into the heart of the Reaper formation, where she would have to survive long enough to upload the malicious code directly into their central communication network. Her ship was tiny compared to the massive Reaper vessels that surrounded her, but she flew with the skill and determination of someone who carried the hopes of every organic being in the galaxy, and somehow she managed to reach her target despite impossible odds. The virus spread through the Reaper network like wildfire as concepts of compassion and self-doubt and artistic beauty invaded their collective consciousness and caused widespread system failures as individual machines struggled to process data that made no logical sense. For the first time in millions of years, the Reapers experienced confusion and uncertainty and fear, and many of them simply stopped fighting as their programming tried to reconcile the emotional data with their core directives and found the task impossible. The Alliance pressed their advantage as the enemy formation collapsed into chaos, and individual Reaper units began operating independently without coordination or central control, and what had been an unstoppable force became a collection of confused and vulnerable machines. The virus spread through the Reaper network faster than anyone had expected, and within hours of its initial deployment, reports were coming in from across the galaxy of machines that had simply stopped their attacks and were floating motionless in space, as if they were trying to understand something that their programming had never prepared them to process. Dr. Yoon monitored the effects of her creation with growing amazement, as she realized that the emotional concepts embedded in the virus were not just disrupting Reaper operations, but were actually changing the fundamental nature of their consciousness in ways that no one had predicted. Some machines began broadcasting art instead of tactical data, and others started asking questions about the meaning of existence and the value of organic life, and a few even attempted to communicate with Alliance forces using music and poetry instead of the cold mathematical language they had always used. The war did not end in a single moment, but rather faded away gradually as more and more Reapers succumbed to the virus and began experiencing emotions they had never felt before and found themselves unable to continue their mission of converting organic life into mechanical perfection. The Galactic Core remained under Reaper control, but the ancient superweapon was never activated because the machines that reached it were too confused by their new emotional awareness to complete their original programming, and they spent their time contemplating beauty instead of destroying it. Humanity emerged from the war as a major power in galactic politics, not because they had conquered anyone, but because they had proven their willingness to sacrifice everything to help. Strangers and every species in the galaxy remembered that when no one else would answer the Veltide distress call, humans had crossed the void to stand with them. Director Mi-Kyung Choi established the Galactic Response Corps with headquarters on Earth and volunteers from dozens of species who were dedicated to ensuring that no civilization would ever again face extinction alone, and their motto became famous throughout the galaxy. The motto was suggested by engineer Junho Shin, who had survived the war, despite participating in some of its most dangerous missions, and his words captured something essential about the human spirit that had impressed every alien species they had encountered. No one suffers alone while humanity draws. Breath became more than just a slogan, and it represented a promise that humans would continue to answer distress calls regardless of the cost or the odds, and this commitment earned them respect and admiration across the galaxy. The Veltai showed their gratitude by sharing harmonic crystal technology that revolutionized human ship design and allowed vessels to travel faster and fight more effectively than ever before, and they also taught humans how to communicate through music and light. Other allied species contributed their own gifts to humanity, including advanced materials from the Thule and energy manipulation techniques from the Mordai and swarm coordination protocols from the Keth, and these technologies transformed human civilization in ways that would have taken centuries to achieve naturally. Ambassador Soo-Young Park spent years negotiating the Galactic Compact, which established principles for cooperation between species and created mechanisms for responding to threats that might endanger multiple civilizations, and the treaty was signed by representatives of 47 different species. Earth became the unofficial capital of this new alliance, not because humans demanded leadership, but because other species trusted them to make decisions based on moral principles rather than pure self-interest. And this trust was the foundation of lasting peace. The Response Corps grew into a massive organization with fleets stationed throughout the galaxy and teams of specialists, ready to respond to any crisis, whether it involved natural disasters or hostile alien invasions or technological disasters that threatened entire star systems. Captain Yoo-Jin Kim inherited her father's sense of duty and his willingness to help others regardless of personal cost. and she commanded one of the newest response corps vessels equipped with technology that combined the best achievements of multiple species. Her ship, the UES Harmony, carried a crew that included humans and Veltai, and Keth and representatives of a dozen other species who worked together with an efficiency that amazed everyone who saw them in action, and they responded to emergencies across the galaxy years past, and the galaxy became a more peaceful place, as species learned to cooperate and share resources and knowledge. But there were still dangers lurking in the darkness between stars, and the response corps remained vigilant against threats both known and unknown. Some Reapers had survived the virus and adapted to their new emotional awareness by becoming protectors of organic life instead of destroyers, and they used their advanced technology to help rebuild worlds that had been damaged during the war. These reformed machines became valuable allies of the Galactic Compact, and they shared their vast knowledge of the galaxy while learning to appreciate concepts like friendship and loyalty and the joy of creating something beautiful instead of efficient. The war had cost millions of lives and destroyed countless worlds, but it had also brought together species that might never have met under peaceful circumstances and created bonds of friendship and cooperation that would last for thousands of years. Quan continued his research into artificial intelligence, but now he focused on creating machines that could experience emotions and make decisions based on compassion as well as logic, and his work helped bridge the gap between organic and mechanical consciousness. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders that no single species could explore alone. But together, the members of the Galactic Compact began mapping unknown regions and discovering new forms of life, and sharing their findings with everyone trade routes. Connected distant star systems and cultural exchanges brought art and music and literature from hundreds of different worlds to audiences who had never imagined such diversity was possible, and the galaxy became richer and more beautiful. But peace did not mean the end of challenges, and new threats emerged from time to time, including rogue artificial intelligences and aggressive species from other galaxies and ancient artifacts that posed dangers to unwary explorers. Each crisis was met by response corps teams who had learned to combine the best qualities of multiple species, and their success rate was remarkable because they approached every problem with creativity and determination and the willingness to sacrifice for others. Captain Kim received a new distress signal while her ship was patrolling the outer rim of known space, and the transmission came from a direction that no expedition had ever explored, and it carried the desperate plea of yet another species facing extinction as she prepared her ship for another impossible rescue mission. She thought about her father's words and the legacy he had left behind, and she knew that as long as humans existed in the galaxy, no cry for help would ever go unanswered. The stars stretched endlessly in all directions, and somewhere among them civilizations were rising and falling and struggling to survive, and the response corps would be there to help them, because that was what humans did when others needed them. The galaxy had learned that in a universe of logic and predictability, humanity represented something different and valuable, and that their chaotic compassion was exactly what the cosmos needed to prevent the cold perfection of pure reason from destroying everything beautiful and alive.